talking a little bit about the volunteerism. Now, this symbol on this flag is what somebody would call anarcho-capitalism, but that's not the whole story. And when you look at things like Marcin Jakubowski's open source village construction set, that's what I'm really getting at. The tool library for a off-grid community obviously has to involve stuff that's going to compensate for the fact that you don't have normal power available. You're going to need all of the same resources that you have in the city. You'll need medical services, you'll need security services, you'll need construction and power and all these things. You have to be able to provide those and make those available in order to attract people. The more people you have, the more resources and labor you're going to have available to do other projects. And remember, this thing is voluntary, okay? If people want to bring construction tear-out type stuff that's still useful, you work with people, you figure out what's going to be on the want list. This requires involvement. This is not lone wolf stuff. This isn't something where you are only an individual and you're a lone wolf and you're up against the whole farmland that says you can't have your share of the rabbit in the field, okay? This has to be something where it's a voluntary association that's working together. Is that communism? No, because you're not forcing other people to be taxed to pay for your lifestyle. That is communism. Communism is where you're taxing out the lives and the assets of others to pay for your lifestyle. And in most communist societies, that usually gets to be the parasites end up running it. Okay, that's what usually ends up happening. The people who work the least end up calling the shots. And they status themselves on how little work they do. If you look at this stuff, you look at what the real cause of the fall of communism was, that's what it was. There was a book written by a former KGB guy, I think it was named Kuzhishkin, and he said one of the things that was causing the Soviet Union to lose its financial ability to support itself wasn't so much a lack of productive ability or a lack of smart people, it was financial support for the Communist Party abroad. Everybody who could talk the hustle, talk the jive, expected a paycheck for talking the jive and talking the hustle. Unfortunately, there are people who flock to the libertarian movement doing the exact same thing and using the language of the libertarian movement to talk the hustle, talk the jive, get other people to pay for their bills and fix up their real estate and do things for them, a lot of times on the promise of, well, we'll eventually contribute this or this will eventually become a group asset, but then you find out that somebody else was filing different types of paperwork saying that's definitely not going to be the case. In fact, you're going to find that to be an incredibly common thing with people who call themselves common law sovereign citizens. They're common law sovereign citizens up to the point that they steal from you, and then they're trying to use the police and the government as a resource to delegate the violence to that resource in order to complete a conflict that they started with somebody. That's usually what's going to happen with those people. They pull some scandalous stunt, they steal, they badmouth, they do a bunch of bad stuff, and then they're the first ones going to the authorities trying to use them as a resource against somebody. And usually this stuff starts to come out after somebody tried to work something out offline. That's usually what happens. So with a voluntary tool library, we've been able to build these things in Portland. They've had varying levels of success. They're not half bad, and they really led to a lot of the gentrification in the city, in the parts of the cities that aren't just slumlord rent farms, okay? Slumlord rent farming is not gentrification. The stuff you'll see in parts of California, that's not gentrification. Where people have access to the resources to fix up their own neighborhoods and improve things, that's gentrification. That's why when you see these riots and this stuff happening in Portland, that's between somebody downtown trying to take control of City Hall, trying to take control of the areas around the federal building. And it's really interesting because they would not dare go into the residential neighborhoods where people put blood, sweat, and tears into fixing up stuff, into taking the Martin Luther King area, the Rosa Parks area, a lot of those neighborhoods that have been fixed up through the blood, sweat, and tears of the people who actually did the work, who repaired stuff, who made that neighborhood. Inner Hawthorne. Inner Hawthorne's an upscale neighborhood now because people went in, fixed stuff up. They had tool libraries, they had resources, you have volunteer gardens. Nobody dares tear that stuff up. Okay, if they tear stuff up like that, people are going to come out of the woodwork and go to war against them. When you're talking about off-grid, backwoods type places, it becomes a lot more ambiguous. And I think that with good organization and maybe a little bit less individualism, because volunteerism means, yeah, you're going to volunteer, you're going to have associations and groups that are co-help type things, and you're not just there to go to war against somebody and have loot sharing. One of the big tests that I've met people involved with the militia movement, one of the big tests was when people wanted to get involved in something, how come they only wanted to get involved with something that was either violence prone or borderline illegal, but would not gather to build outhouses and latrines at a training area? Something that simple was what was pairing groups on Facebook or MySpace or some of the private websites. Groups would go from 3,000 or 4,000 people down to 5 or 6 people when somebody gets together and starts saying, well, the first mission is to go out to this property and we're going to build the bathrooms and the showers so that it could later be used as a training area and you'll have access to that. All of a sudden, those groups start shrinking in a hurry. Interest starts losing. So expect your voluntarist organizations to, when it's voluntarism, to actually build something constructive, expect those groups to be small. If it's groups that want to talk about conducting acts of terrorism, well, all of a sudden everybody's interested, but the question is, what are the ulterior motives? And you'll find that those ulterior motives are all over the map. It goes from people with authentic grudges against the government or authentic grudges against banks to people that would rather just sell those people to the criminal justice system. And I would say that the ones who want to sell others to the criminal justice system tend to be in a majority. Okay, that's reality. But when we're talking about putting together things like the Global Village Construction Set, volunteering equipment and vehicles and some labor to these off-grid communities, alternative communities where you buy the land, you're not just taking over and squatting someplace, then that's what's going to work. My personal experience on these things, where you had property owner permission, you had some handshake agreements, and everybody says, oh, here's how we're going to close a deal, and we'll talk about trading silver and have a handshake and a prayer together. A handshake circle and a prayer together isn't much in court when somebody decides to renege on a deal, call the sheriff, put up no trespassing signs. You can't even get your construction materials and equipment back. Okay, you'll find that those are some of the first people to call. The first people to call an attorney. Their attorney is going to call whatever law enforcement agencies he feels is useful to cause you harm and to facilitate the crimes of his client. That's what the guy's going to do. If you get involved with organizations that are voluntarist in nature and everybody to be a part of this has to provide something of material value in order to get anything back out of it, well, that really separates the wheat from the chaff. And that's where you're going to be able to figure out who the people are that you can build things with versus those who are there on a take for whatever reason. And I'll talk more about this in a little bit, but you'll see in some of these pictures, this isn't just talk. This is excuse me. This is stuff that I've built. This is stuff that I've brought to the table. This is stuff that I'm willing to put together again once I get the right group of people together and the right mindset together with some people that want to do something constructive on the off-grid retreat and alternative volunteerist community perspective.